Today's presenter is Bob Chaput, and got a long history in HIPAA and data security compliance, and is actually one of our contributing experts on this particular subject for HITECH Answers. So we've been picking Bob's brain now for well over a year, I think, and we're excited to have him here today to talk about a very important subject matter. And so, with no further ado, I am going to change your role, Bob, and I think you can now steer my steer my event.
Okay, terrific. And I'm ready to drive. I'm going to share my desktop and bring up a PowerPoint presentation in presentation mode. So let me just do a sanity check. Are you able to see this slide, Carol?
Yep, you are good to go.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you very much for the introduction and the kind words, and welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. I certainly understand how busy everyone is in general, and specifically in healthcare today with the myriad of things that are coming at all of us in this space. The webinar, as Carol indicated, is how to develop your HIPAA security policies and procedures. Just to put this in some very broad context, we think about HIPAA and HITECH compliance as really comprising three key areas that require attention. Number one is privacy, number two is security, and number three is data breach notification, which came about as a result of the HITECH Act. Previously, that law and the set of regulations, which now exist simply in an interim final rule form, did not exist. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're going to focus on security, the middle pillar, and we're going to focus within that context on policies and procedures. Let me see. So I'm always reminded and present this slide to you at the behest of our attorneys, and must say this is legal subject matter. We are not attorneys. We work very, very hard at being expert at this information. And as relates to the second point, it's a very dynamic and evolving area, as those of you involved in this space, certainly in the meaningful use world, know, because meaningful use final rule came about not so long ago. Same thing is happening. There's a very large pending so-called notice of proposed rulemaking around the effect of the HITECH Act on HIPAA privacy and security and enforcement. So just make note of the fact that this is evolving subject matter. Like most subject matter, especially rules, regulations, and the law, it's subject to a lot of different interpretations. We believe we present unbiased, objective, and straight-ahead information. And to point four, we do our darndest to make sure it's accurate and up-to-date. We may slip, and if we do, it's not intentional. If indeed there's something we say that's not consistent with your learning or understanding, please do make a point to tell us that. We have no aim or objective other than trying to help organizations become and remain compliant with HIPAA and HITECH requirements. And please rely again on this information for educational purposes, consciousness raising and awareness, but not for legal advice. I make certain assumptions in this presentation that attendees have a reasonable working knowledge of HIPAA and HITECH, and sometimes that's accurate, sometimes it's not. If you are seeking additional information, we have done a number of webinars over time and offer them on our website along with other resources, and the links are provided at the bottom of this page. Our objectives today are several-fold. I want to help build an understanding of what is really required from a documentation and policies and procedures point of view within the HIPAA security final rule, discover how they ought to fit into an overall security program. There's an interrelationship with many other components. Learn what specific policies you need to create in your organization, whether you're a covered entity, a provider of some sort, insurance company, medical claims clearinghouse, or whether you're a business associate. We'll talk about those. We're going to get into a practical, actionable set of steps that you can follow to design and develop policies and procedures. We have done a lot of work in this area, both custom work as well as work to develop a toolkit to help organizations jumpstart their effort, and we'll show you that briefly. And then overall objective is to help you fundamentally get started with some practical, actionable steps. This is the 2-minute drill. I'm an impatient executive, have been for much of my career, and I like people to get to the punchline. And this is kind of the punchline in this one slide if you have to depart early. Bear in mind that developing policies and procedures is not a task to be relegated to your executive assistant, administrative assistant, or secretary. It's a big project. It's also a team sport. I recommend cross-functional team be assembled, including representatives from, I'll say, quote-unquote operations. That may mean clinical staff. It may be legal. It should be from your IT organization. Business management should be involved in this. And this is a project that ought to be business risk management focused. Ensure you have an executive sponsor, because developing policies and procedures is going to be a large, complex project. Don't underestimate what's involved. Policies and procedures are a key part of your overall security program, but bear in mind, and I'll mention it again later, it's only a part. And whether you're large or small in terms of the size of your organization and the resources that you have available, seek out help. And the help can range from hiring experts to come in and do the work for you, to starting off with tools and templates and kits, to various and sundry other forms of help. The slides on the that appear over here on the right side of the screen, one of the slides I'm going to talk about in more detail later. Here are the steps to go through a process of developing and then providing ongoing maintenance to policies and procedures. And another slide, I apologize for that. Another slide we'll talk about more later, how policies and procedures fit in, but they are only a part of the program. So that's the 2-minute drill, if you will. Here's the roadmap we're going to follow through the course of the discussion today. And I'll begin with some quick introductions. First of myself, and I will make a couple of quick points here and not belabor this. Point number one is I just want you to know that I didn't recently fall off a turnip truck, nor did I recently declare myself an expert in the space. I've been involved in healthcare for over 20 years, and I've had responsibility in GE, Johnson & Johnson, in a large organization here in Middle Tennessee called Healthways, for some of the largest healthcare data sets in the world. And we served in the Healthways organization the largest 4 payers in the country today, Aetna, United, WellPoint, and Cigna, as well as 31 of the 39 Blues plans, all of whom, as a business associate, we're, I'll say politely, breathing down our neck about security and privacy and data breach related matters. So I just humbly say to you, I get it and understand it. And the second point I'd make on this slide is really on the bottom. I'm at a point in my career, I've had a delightful experience and 30 years in some great companies. At this point in time, I'm focused on helping smaller business owners, leaders, and managers manage risk around areas where I've developed some expertise, I would submit humbly. The next introduction I'd like to make, in case you haven't been there, and this is one of the motivations, or if you will, calls to arms, is the Health and Human Service data breach website. I've dubbed it the Wall of Shame. We'll take a quick side excursion there. Hopefully you see my screen. If you haven't been to this site, and Carol, you and I did not talk about this, but I'm happy to provide copies of all these slides. Oftentimes attendees ask about that. And
yeah, both the recording and your slide presentation will be made available to the attendees, yes.
Okay, terrific. Well, you will have this link. It's long and complicated. In case you're trying to scribble it down now, you can obviously Google it as well. But as a consequence of the HITECH Act, Office for Civil Rights, which now has responsibility for enforcement of the security rule, which was not the case up until July 2009, OCR is required to keep on a publicly available website a list of all organizations who have experienced data breaches. That is they have, in an unauthorized or impermissible manner, caused the disclosure of your or mine or some of our fellow citizens' electronic protected health information. The website conveniently, that's inconvenient, isn't it? I'm saying I'm sure. I don't want to do that either. The website conveniently allows you to filter and do a search. You can look for medical practices. You can restrict it to certain states, or at least include only the string CA in it. Let's try Illinois. That might be a little better. Sort it. You can sort by the number of individuals who were affected. You can also look at the kinds of bad things that have happened and where the data was located when those bad things happened. Leading the league in terms of data breaches is an insurance plan in South Florida called AvMed. Number 2, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. In the first case, 2 laptops that were unencrypted containing EPHI were stolen. In the second case, 57 disk drives, which had been decommissioned from machines, ended up being stolen out of an office in a building, and the story goes on and on. I bring this to your attention because security and privacy has never been more important than it is today. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but the newsflash is that what the HITECH Act was fundamentally put a lot more teeth into privacy and security final rules than had existed before. This is a static image of what we just looked at. As of the end of January, 234 different covered entities were involved in data breaches. 50 different business associates were named, and we have breached the equivalent of the combined populations of Houston and Chicago together. 6.5 million people, fellow citizens, have had their records breached. Health and Human Services has said, we're getting really serious about this. If you have a breach involving more than 500 individuals, it will trigger a federal investigation. More about enforcement of privacy and security. To date, since the Office for Civil Rights has been responsible for enforcing privacy, there have been almost 58,000 complaints that have been registered. OCR just took over responsibility for the enforcement of security last year, and they have at this moment in time, or actually as of the end of the year, about 211 open complaints. It's getting serious. That's part of my introduction. So if that weren't enough, here are some other reasons why you should care about this subject. Policies and procedures are absolutely unequivocally required in the HIPAA security final rule. I'll show you the Code of Federal Regulation specifically in a moment. The second reason you should care is that it's a large and complex project, and time is wasting, as the third point illustrates. And fundamentally, the real important reason is that your stakeholders are trusting that you're doing this. And I don't like to be ominous or be scary about this, but there are going to be organizations whose reputation becomes so damaged by these events that they're going to go out of business as a consequence of failing to have appropriate policies, procedures, and safeguards and controls in place. So I think it's important for organizations to care. I mentioned a moment ago the HITECH Act. Well, HIPAA is not exactly a newsflash. The HITECH Act is somewhat of a newsflash. But in the context of HIPAA, as some of you may recall, it was originally the Kassenbaum-Kennedy bill passed in 1996. It had several titles. Within those titles, specifically Title II, an area called Administrative Simplification. This was fundamentally a call to the healthcare world to join the new millennium and get electronic. And part and parcel of that was a move to electronic document interchange as it related to claims processing, a new standard transaction formats. Along with that came final rules and regulations around privacy and security. HITECH translates into health information technology for economic and clinical health. For most organizations, those that have failed to pay attention to privacy and security up to this point in time, it has a translation that goes along the lines of, hey, it's time to end your compliance holiday. That's my bad joke for today. If you want to boil it down, we could do a whole session on the HITECH Act and how it has raised the ante around privacy and security. but if you want to boil it down, in case you hadn't seen this kind of a breakdown before, I believe there are 6 fundamental game changers. First, mandatory audits. Office for Civil Rights has hired Booz Allen Hamilton to design an audit plan to deliver on the mandatory audits that are required in the law. They've simultaneously begun to staff up in 10 regional offices around the country for those audits. Second point is that all of the penalties and fines that are levied, and the whole system has been revamped. There's a new civil monetary penalty system. The monies that are raised as a result of non-compliance fines are going back into HHS coffers and will be used for further enforcement. Speaking offline and non-quotable, I attended a conference, talked to somebody from OCR. They're looking at this as a virtuous upward spiral. Invest a little money in audit plans and auditors, get them out there, start collecting money, hire more auditors, raise more money, hire more auditors. The third point, state attorneys general were given jurisdiction under the HITECH Act to file civil suits on behalf of their citizens. That's happened a couple of times now. There's a little confusion about it, but absolutely unequivocally, it's happened 2 times in the state of Connecticut by Attorney General Richard Blumenthal and recently in the state of Vermont. And these, so far, have resulted in settlements. A health plan in Connecticut so far has settled with the state for $250,000 and with the insurance commission for $375,000, I believe. Fourth point, in case you weren't aware, and you're a covered entity, or if you're a business associate, that you are now, as a BA, statutorily obligated to comply with all relevant aspects of HIPAA security and HIPAA privacy. This is a casting of a much, much larger net. And as a side point, if you read the so-called Notice of Proposed Rulemaking on the modifications that are coming about as a result of the HITECH Act, there's a proposal that subcontractors of business associates fall under the definition of BAs, which would make them statutorily obligated. That's point 5. They're minimally today contractually obligated. And then finally, point 6 is around data breach notifications. I showed you the wall of shame. If you have a data breach involving more than 500 individuals, it's like winning the bad lottery. Number 1, you have to notify all the individuals who were affected as to what happened, why it happened, how it happened, what you're doing to mitigate risk in the near term, and what you're going to do to protect them from identity theft in the future. Number 2, you're obligated to notify all local media, major print, major radio, major television outlets, and let them know you've had the breach. And number 3, you must notify HHS of this event, and all of that has to happen within 60 days. Back to policies and procedures. We, for the 3 pillars I mentioned up front, privacy, security, and data breach notification, have roadmaps to compliance, and I'll show you the security roadmap and show you where policies and procedures fit in. The indications that you see in red here are actual citations from the Code of Federal Record. In 164 is the HIPAA security final rule. So these refer to various safeguard areas, various standards, and various implementation specifications in the law. This is one of the standards of the law. You must complete a security evaluation. In our work with clients, I see we're going to have some very interesting and funky animation here. Apologize for that. Where did this come from? In any case, that work leads into work around data breach prep, preliminary remediation plan addressing low-hanging fruit, feed into another requirement in the law to do a risk analysis. Those bodies of work fuel additional bodies of work, which in turn begin to converge into actual assembly of documentation, as well as the completion of the implementation of controls and safeguards, and then finally back to the beginning, because the security evaluation is something that must be done periodically. The main point of this slide is to show you where policies and procedures fit in. They're absolutely unequivocally a requirement in the law, and I'll show you that statute in a moment. Why you need them. Well, if you forget about the law and forget about all the doom and gloom and appearing on the wall of shame, if you just think about policies and procedures from a fundamental business point of view, they do several things for you. And whether the policies and procedures in this area or policies and procedures that might go into your employee or colleague handbook or policies and procedures around safety, fundamentally you're starting out by articulating your values as an organization. You're setting expectations around behavior. You're putting down a fundamental foundation upon which procedures and tools and processes will be built. If necessary, it provides a foundation in the event that sanctions need to be rendered. It'll also, quite frankly, especially in the context of HIPAA, help you defend against willful neglect. As a side point, I refer to the civil monetary penalty system. The fines are on a graduated scale that start, I'll say, as low as $100 per record breach and go up to $10,000 with a maximum fine of $1.5 million. And that scale is based on culpability. And the worst tier, if you will, or the highest tier, is a circumstance in which, and hopefully none of you attending today will find yourself a circumstance of willful neglect. You've just failed miserably, unequivocally, have paid no attention, and have not taken the first step or vestige or ounce of effort to abide by the requirements of the law. Having policies and procedures in place or starting there is at least an indication of a good faith effort. Policies and procedures may help you prosecute cases, and they may help you defend yourself in certain cases. And again, overall, they're part of a balanced security program. I showed you a glimpse of this slide earlier. We believe that there are 4 essential elements of an overall effective security program. It includes a set of policies that define values, a set of procedures. You can think of the policies as the what will happen, what we stand for, and the procedures standing for how we're going to go about doing it. Very, very key element of any security program are people, and that includes technical people who do some of the work. It includes the trained and aware end users, as well as a supportive executive team. And then finally, technology. One of the single biggest, I'll call it sin, allow me, that we find in organizations dealing with security for the first time is that they see the word security and they immediately believe it's something to flip over the transom and turn over to the technology people. I'm an operations and technology person by training, so I'm about to say the following with no disrespect intended. That's a huge mistake. Don't turn your security program over to the geek squad. It's absolutely and unequivocally the wrong thing to be doing. Our focus today is going to be on policies and procedures. I mentioned a moment ago, this is a very wordy slide. I apologize. Let me highlight something for you. Part of the HIPAA security final rule articulates, and this is the exact language of the law, that you must implement reasonable and appropriate policies to comply with the standards, the implementation specs, and other requirements of this subpart. And the subpart is referring to the security rule. There's also a very explicit standard around documentation. You must maintain these policies and procedures, and you must document other actions, activities, and assessments that are required in the law. And there are so-called implementation specifications within it. I guess I'll use this, it's a little bit of a side point, but it may be an instructive or educational moment for some attendees today. This is a good illustration of the taxonomy of the HIPAA security final rule. It has 5 major areas, and the areas include things called safeguards or standards, more explicitly. Standards break down further into implementation specifications. So this particular standard and the one on the prior slide fall under an area called policies and procedures and documentation. And these are the 2 standards under the law, and an example of implementation specs, which says you must keep it for 6 years, you must make it available to people, and this is not a project that you can call a destination. It's more of a journey. That is to say, in plainer language, you have to not only create these things, you have to update them and maintain them. So the next question becomes, which policies and procedures do you need to develop? I'm going to take a break, have a sip of water, if you don't mind. And while I'm doing that, ask Carol if there are any questions that have come in so far that we might be able to attend to at this point.
Yeah, we've actually had several of them, but I think that I'll just gather them off of the Q&A at the end, if that works for you.
Well, that was perfect. We should have rehearsed that because I have had a chance to have a sip of water.
That was definitely rehearsed, right? We went over that, right?
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's so funny. I do have to say, I love your comment that this is not a destination, it's a journey. That's great. I actually wrote that down. Okay, I'm going back on mute.
Okay, very good. I'll try not to surprise you again. I'm going to exit the presentation here and just show you, this is under the banner of what policies and procedures are needed. And I'm doing this, I actually have the list. You may be able to see on the slide previewer over here on the left-hand side. But I also want to show you how we came to a determination of what was required. We do a lot of work in this area, as I mentioned. These are the 5 safeguard areas in the HIPAA security law. They break down into so-called implementation standards, and the standards into implementation specifications, again, just for illustrative purposes. A moment ago, I talked about the requirement around policies and procedures, and as a side point, we use this as an assessment tool to help organizations understand where they stand, where they are with respect to compliance. And we've developed a checklist, and we've developed that checklist of what policies and procedures are required on the basis of a very detailed, and I'm scrolling through this right now, but we've done it on the basis of a very detailed analysis and reading of the law, along with some compatriots of ours who are attorneys, and we have determined that there are some 53 core policies and procedures that are required in the various areas of the law. So I happen to have paused here around the area of technical safeguards, and then in fact there is a requirement. This is like the Department of Redundancy Department. There's a requirement for a policy and procedure on policies and procedures. How's that? So we've read the law very carefully, and I wanted to, just by way of illustration, as we went through the law, the language of the law, anywhere it indicated a requirement for policies and/or procedures, we've included it in our list. And we've been at this, by the way, since 2004, before it was very fashionable to be talking about HIPAA security, but by which date, by the way, it was a requirement for covered entities to have become compliant. Actually, it was April 2005. So back to the, recovering back from that for the presentation, here's the same list of policies and procedures that are required by our determination. Under administrative safeguards, there are some 29 different policies and procedures. Under physical safeguards, this gets at the security around your computer room, security around workstations, security around media devices, the dismantlement or taking equipment out of service, what you must do with it from a responsible, appropriate, and reasonable safeguard point of view. There are technical safeguards, and then policies and procedures and documentation required. These are the core 53. We've worked on and built all these. We've added an additional 4 to the collection that we've created, as and I'll talk more about a part of our toolkit, but I wanted to give you a sense of the comprehensiveness. And again, you'll have all of this included in the materials that we provide to you. Next, we'll digress for a moment to show you what a good policy and procedure looks like. And this is based on work that we have done over time, work I've done internally in some large organizations, as well as work that we've done with customers over the course of the last 8 years or so. Each one of our policies and procedures is structured in a way that includes, let me do something here I might have done a moment ago, that includes a section on the purpose of the policy and procedure, and I'm trying to scroll. It includes definitions. We have a 200 plus different terms and phrases that are relevant to understanding HIPAA privacy and security. Definition section, a policy section. As I mentioned before, the policy is the articulation of your values, the what you stand for or what needs to be done. The procedures are an articulation of how you go about doing it and who in fact performs that work, in this case the HIPAA security officer on this very first point. We then move into an actual citation. This is the Code of Federal Record itself, the relevant section, and the actual language in the law as reference to anybody reviewing the policies and procedures in the future, so they know where you're coming from. We do an analysis and a discussion of why that policy and procedure is required. And then finally, both internal and external cross-references to other policies and procedures. That's the internal cross-reference. And then a collection of external references that are relevant to this particular subject matter, this particular domain. So let me return to the PowerPoint and fire that up. This is a condensed version of what I just showed you. It'll be handy and viewable by you when you receive the slide deck. And then let's now talk about, so how do you go about, how do you get your arms around a project like this? We've documented what we think are, it used to be 10, and every once in a while we come up with another one. I like even numbers, but it's now 11 essential steps for getting your policies and procedures in place. First of all, I mentioned this earlier, this is a team sport. This should be a cross-functional activity. It should involve inside legal counsel. It should involve people from technology, people from the clinical staff, people from the operations area. A member of the executive team should be the sponsor of this. Make sure that as you set about on your journey, you set business risk management goals. This is not a technology science fair project. It's a business risk management project. Next, get educated. There are a plethora of webinars, there are resources, there's reading materials, there's the law itself. Understand what the requirements are in this particular area, and then the consequences for noncompliance. Design your outline or standard template so that depending on how you go about it, you've got people working off the same framework. Determine what policies are required. We have a point of view on that that we, of course, believe is very well-founded and very logical and appropriate. You may find and may have a different point of view. Evaluate alternatives, build versus buy. The build decision has pros and cons and costs and risks associated with it. The buy alternative actually may be hire a consultant to do all this for you, or it may be buy a toolkit, or it may be a combination of the two things. Create a project plan, set goals, objectives, measurements, timetables, etc. And as you feel appropriate and can approach it this way, divide and conquer, assign out the work. Build a change management program. And what I mean here is this is not about keeping the policies up to date. That's a very important step that's coming up. This is about taking into account the implications of and the operational effect, if you will, on the organization as a part of your rolling out policies and procedures in this regard. Again, I'll say it for perhaps the third time and may not be the last. This is a large, complex project, and it's not just about shuffling paper around. This is about implementing policies and procedures that will be followed in the organization. One of the most egregious things that can happen to you if an audit is performed is that if you have the most lovely version of policies and procedures sitting on your credenza behind your desk and nobody in the world in the organization is following them. If you have put in writing that that is the policy of your organization and you're not following it, that is equally as bad as, and in the eyes of some auditors, worse than not having written anything down to begin with. So do make a serious sub-project out of the change management, the effect on the organization. Create a process for reviewing, revising, approving, and communicating, tied into the first one. Make sure that you integrate what you produced into onboarding of new employees or colleagues into the organization, as well as ongoing training. And then the point I alluded to before, make sure you have a maintenance process in place so that these policies remain current. And talk for a moment about what we've done from a toolkit point of view. I mentioned some of this before. We've given this very, very deep thought and consideration, and it's a body of work that's evolved over time and reflects all the latest requirements in the law. And we keep all the things, all the policies and procedures we've developed up to date. We've done detailed readings. We've used as a framework the law itself. We've not invented something. We've not gone to Security 101 in general and pulled something off. We've written everything against the framework of the law. We've developed these policies and procedures with a design intent, a design goal that they're 90% complete. In some cases, for some organizations, they may be 95% complete. For other organizations, they may be 50% complete because of the nature of the decisions that need to be done. They're all created in Word format, available as templates. They can be readily tailored and modified for covered entities, business associates, or even subcontractors. And what we've attempted to do is create them in such a way that it empowers the covered entity or the VA to combine them together. If the number 53 looks to be too overwhelming, they are structured in a way that matches that taxonomy I described before of an area, a standard, and an implementation specification. So if you want to collapse together the policies and procedures of 3 or 4 implementation specs underneath a standard, that's your prerogative, and you can do that. We've designed them in a way for that to be done. I'm not going to so much as do a demo here as to just tell you a little bit more about it. I've alluded to some of this. The toolkit itself ships as a zip file, contains instructions, a comprehensive glossary of terms and definitions, the policy checklist, and a number of resources and references. And today, the toolkit ships with 57 policies and procedures in it, and we provide 60 minutes of complimentary email, telephone, and web support to anyone that needs help with it. Let's see. Organizations that have bought it, I won't belabor this, have found it to be a very, very competitive and effectively priced solution, saving them lots and lots of work, jump-starting the project, and saving them lots of dollars in outside consulting fees. And for many organizations, it's been their first line of defense against a situation of willful neglect and indication that they've not done any work on it at all. So I know I went quickly because I wanted to leave time for a Q&A. Just by way of wrap-up, this was the 2-minute drill I presented at the very beginning. Just to reiterate a couple of points, it's a big project, but there are ways to jump-start it. Remember, it's cross-functional. Ensure that you have, if you're a medical practice, executive sponsor may be your managing physician in the practice. If you're a hospital, I'm hoping it's going to be your compliance or risk management individual. If you're a business associate, it may be, and hopefully is somebody who's a member of the C-suite in that organization. And I mentioned before the availability of tools and toolkits. There are many out in the marketplace. We obviously have a point of view and a bias, but if you're at that point of considering them, please keep us in mind. Carol pointed out, by the way, some of the upcoming webinars that HITECH Answers is offering. This will be in your slide deck as well. Tomorrow, coincidentally, we're doing a presentation on conducting a HIPAA security risk analysis, which is a requirement in general in the law, but it's getting a little bit of attention now because of the meaningful use stage 1 requirements around the risk analysis. We'll do a webinar in a week or so on how to assess your compliance program. And then, of course, you're in this session today. We're doing one ourselves on policies and procedures towards the end of the month. And you can click on any one of these individual links or visit our website and further check out the webinars. So Carol indicated before, I would provide my contact information. It's here, and additionally, it is will be available on the slide deck. I'm going to take another breath of air. And
while I get ready.
While you get ready, Carol, that's my cue.
Well, we definitely have some questions coming in. Just a reminder to everybody, if you could feed me your questions through the chat box or just by hitting the little question icon. And before we begin the Q&A, again, a reminder that I will email a copy of this to all of you, probably by the end of the day today, and if not, certainly by first thing in the morning. And in that email to you, I will also include Bob's contact information. So, Bob, are you back? Are you back from your water break?
I am. I'm ready to go.
Okay, you ready? All right. This is like the fun part.
Yeah.
Also, just real quick, we've got about 13 minutes, and so we'll try to get through these questions. But if we don't get to your question, please go to the Ask a Question forum in HITECH Answers. Okay, ready? Okay, first question. As a BA that does not access, transmit, or see any ePHI, are we still required under HITECH to be HIPAA compliant to the same degree?
No. No. The secret ingredient in that question is whether you see, handle, process, or otherwise in the course of executing your responsibility on behalf of the covered entity, PHI. If you have no requirement to do that and no situation in which you're going to have access to that, then you're off the hook. Now, I say that, A, I'm not a lawyer, B, I don't know all the circumstances, but just based on the way the question was answered, I'd say, no, you're not obligated. I'll give you one other illustration. We're working with a company right now. It's a large covered entity. They have 80, they're a business associate, and their concern is preparing for what's coming out of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. They have 80 subcontractors. They put them in two categories. Those who have direct access to PHI, and they happen to be people who do some claims handling for them, some transcription work. There's actually a group of phlebotomists who do blood draws for them. That's absolutely unequivocally the case that they have access to PHI. On the other hand, they have the people in the on-site cafeteria, the people that water the plants, the janitorial service, etc. They have no access. They don't transmit, receive, create, or maintain PHI. The second category of 40 people or organizations are not required to be compliant with the law.
Okay, great. We actually had several attendees ask if they can get a copy of your checklist. I think in chat back to me if this is different, but I think they're referring to the list of 50. Is it 54 plus?
Yes, actually, it'll be in the slide deck.
Yeah,
in the form of that series of slides.
Right. They'll be able to see that. Okay, great. Next question. This is actually a meaningful use question. Have you heard of anything where you cannot? Have you heard if you cannot receive your incentive payments for meeting MU if you're a hospital and you've had a HIPAA violation during the reporting period? So during I'm assuming he means the 90-day reporting period for attestation. If they have a violation, can they meet MU? So that's a really interesting question.
It's a great question. I have no knowledge of any such thing happening, which is not to say it's not the case. You know, I can offer an opinion, which is that's sort of like cheap, putting people in the penalty box. Yeah. So, but I have no knowledge one way or another of it.
You know what? That really is a great question. You know, I will get our HITECH Answers researchers. That might be me. We'll get on that because I'll post that in the VEC, and for that particular attendee, you'll get an email back with that question. But that's really a great question, and we'll find out the answer for that. Next question. As a BA that does not Oops, nope, I already asked you that question, sorry. Yes, you can get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. All right, I'm just going through these questions. Okay, here we go. The next one is it true that completing all of the policies and procedures is sufficient to meet HIPAA security compliance requirements, or is that not true?
Yeah, that's not true. I'll go back to the balanced security program that I mentioned before. Sadly, organizations think that once they've documented and killed a bunch of trees and created a bunch of paper, that they're done. Quite honestly, when you get into the policies and procedures, you will find that drives, each policy and procedure is going to drive some decision making or force some decision making to occur, and other of it is going to cause additional work to happen in the form of actually implementing what's inside the policy and procedure. Let me give you an example. There's a policy and procedure around transmission security. That is not transmitting EPHI over an open internet, over an open network like the internet. Well, fine, you can put down a great policy and procedure that says we're going to use encryption. Terrific. You've got to go away and implement that. So just doing the paperwork is not sufficient at all. It's a journey, and that's part of the journey is doing the policies and procedures, but certainly not all of it.
Okay. Well, it kind of leads me to the next question. Actually, a couple of people asked this as well. They're actually BAs and wanting to know if they have to have their own set of policies and procedures. I think
yes.
You touched upon that, right?
Yeah, and I saw a recent survey. First of all, we don't really know how many BAs there are in this country.
Well, yeah, sure.
CMS has estimated it was a real swag, between 1 and 2 million. Okay, and so I saw a study, notwithstanding the fact we don't know the total number, but I saw a study that surveyed a bunch of business associates, and 2/3 of them were not even aware that they were statutorily obligated to comply with the law. So once you become obligated to comply with the law, that puts you in the situation, I'm going back to this, if you can still see my screen, Carol. It puts you in the situation of having to address each one of these standards in the law.
Right,
you know,
right.
and that includes policies and procedures. So the short answer is yes.
And is that because people who actually, or companies that actually are BAs don't maybe think of themselves as BAs or don't recognize that they are a BA?
That's right. And somebody, I think in your question, it was great. There are 4 operative verbs to pay attention to. Do you create, receive, maintain, or transmit PHI? And if you do, in the course of delivering service to a covered entity, then you are a BA, and you are statutorily obligated to comply with the law.
Yeah, and that is really the core issue. Did they touch? Did they smell? Did they feel any PHI? That's
right.
Right. Okay. Next question is, really what this person is saying is, does the breadth and depth of the policies and procedures, is that the same for a large hospital versus a small medical practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Boy, and we work with a number of medical practices, and I'll say it this way. They get a load of 54 policies, and they look at me and they go, are you joking? Are you absolutely out of your mind? So that's why, we've designed what we've put together in a way that they can be collapsed. You have to touch all areas that address or language in the law that talks about having a policy and procedure. And I'm trying to find one here real quickly while we're talking. This one's more about assessment. But you have to address all those areas. Now, can you collapse and consolidate some of them? Yes. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, you need to address all aspects of the law where there's a requirement.
The law is law.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Whether you have 5 physicians or, you're a huge hospital network, I take it. Okay, all right. And let's see here, just going through a few more. Some of these questions were sort of doubled up. There was actually quite a number of questions and clarifications still about BAs. Determining if, let me read this real quick. Yeah. Just, this question of access to PHI information. So if they don't have access to PHI information, then they're not considered a BA.
That's right. I mean, again, we're talking some hypotheticals here, and I don't know the exact circumstances.
Yeah, right.
And remember what I said in the beginning, I'm not a lawyer. I need to know more to address
Right.
that.
Maybe that's a question that person could perhaps email you offline and get some more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, great. Well, and that is all I have in the Q&A, and I want to thank, and we're right on schedule, so that's even better. I want to thank everybody for their time today and attention. I will get a copy of this recording and the slide deck out to everybody's attention, along with Bob, your email contact. And Bob, I imagine that we'll do another event for HITECH Answers at some point. I've actually attended a couple of Bob's webinars, so the free webinars that you talked about, and I'll put that URL in the email as well. They're obviously really terrific, based on what you viewed today. You can see how knowledgeable he is. Highly recommend it. And with that, I hope everybody has a great day. And Bob, we'll talk to you later.
Okay. Thanks very much, Carol.
Bye.